burst and break the cycle.
Okay, that'd be wonderful, because this cycle has gone on too long.
Yeah.
3 weeks.
Three-
You always say, oh, cold, just rest and drink a lot of liquids. And I did have those, the runny nose, the couple of sick days, and then this is week number 3. I'm tired of it.
The problem is that there's a number of people who have twitchy lungs. I mean, in other words, they don't normally have asthma or wheezing, but they get it after a cold, and it triggers it and gets their whole system all fired up, and then they have a wheezy lung for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's that asthma, chronic bronchitis, or those years of smoking that you had when you were
years and years ago. But
I mean, sometimes when people come in with this horrible cough, the last thing they need is an antibiotic because it isn't an infection. It's twitchy lungs, and sometimes a burst of steroids just takes them out of the cycle of coughing, making it twitchier and irritated, and then more coughing, and then more irritation, more coughing, more irritation, and the asthma perpetuates itself. So sometimes that's what people really need. I have to talk about the microbiome a little bit more.
Please do. What is a microbiome?
So there are more cells on your body that are not you than there are you cells.
So all these foreigners are hanging around here.
You're like the earth. You're actually a living organism, and you have all these little animals living on you, and the trees growing, and you have grass and fields, and have all of the different things that are growing and living on you. And that makes you alive, because if you didn't have them, if you were perfectly sterile, the old science fiction things, you go into this place and it just burns all the bugs off you and you're perfectly sterile, you would die, you would bleed to death within days. Your liver would fail, your gut would shut down.
Because you need all these other organisms.
You are symbiotically alive with all the rest of the things that are living upon you. Unless you become a barren planet, you live because of the animals that are living on you. Viruses, bacteria, fungus, yeast, all these things are part of it. And the balance is what is the wonderful thing that we have, is that we live in relationship with these things. And one of the things that I was listening to a lecture a week ago it was a conference put on at STSU, World Issues, and we had our guest last week, who talked about
World Health Issues, right?
And so that was a week and a half ago. So one of the things on the lecture was 2 biologists back to back, one about but specifically one about people who have overgrowth infections from their GI tract and all the problems that come when antibiotics kill some of the bacteria in your gut, which are good, and then bad ones prevail, or your gut just doesn't live without the bacteria. And so what they've done, and they find more and more they're doing, is fecal transplants, they call them, which is they get a donation from a relative, and you make it in a slurry, and you give an enema.
This sounds utterly disgusting.
Yes, it does. But think about it.
I'm thinking it's disgusting.
You live because, one of the things, and the next picture was a picture of a monkey, healthy little monkey eating elephant dung, and saying, the world that we live in is not dirty enough, that we need to share these bugs in a certain way so that you don't, you're not, that your world is not all elm trees, and then elm tree bug versus the thing can come in and wipe out all of the trees in your community. That you need to share bugs, and you do. We do all the time. You shake hands with people, you touch people, they touch you, you touch animals, you eat meat. The world is this sharing deal. If you think you're alone in the world, you've got another thing coming. You are a microbiome. You have it, and you want to keep it healthy. And so you start messing with antibiotics, you mess with that. And so I would wonder if we would do better in a dirtier world, in one sense. Now, that's not to say that when the people preparing my food, I want them,
You'd like them to be clean.
I
It'd be
would
nice.
rather they wash their hands after they go to the bathroom. But on the other hand, maybe, just maybe, I would be better off, unless they have an illness. And Bob
Can't stand this.
gets out the sanitizer when we're talking about it. Just make it curl people's toes. But the truth of the matter is, we live in this dirty world, and we've started infringing on it with antibiotics and over cleanliness, and it might have been a mistake, or at least we're learning more about this. And so I'm not saying anything more than to be aware that this is that we are not, we are we have a large microbiome, and that when we mess with certain medicines, we're messing with it, and when we get obsessed about cleanliness, and it's a mistake, I believe.
You can overdo it. All right. Well,
With that, we're going to go.
We
I
are
want to
going
talk
to
about
take a
heart
break.
disease. You're wearing a red shirt.
yes,
And
thinking
I
about
think
heart.
it's Heart Month. And our
Okay.
show coming up a week from tomorrow night is going to be about heart. Tomorrow night is about MS.
And
so
that is prevalent in South Dakota.
We would love to have people call us about their questions about MS, or call your questions about heart, please.
Very good. We'll be back right after these words. Welcome back to Prairie Doc Radio. Joan Hogan here with Dr. Rick Holm, who is diagnosing my illness. I'm on my 3rd week of a cold. He's thinking it may not be a cold, and fortunately for me, he's going to check and just see if it could be something else. Now, that's nice for me, but how about people that are listening and might be in the same position as I am? What do you suggest if you've had a cold that runs over 2 weeks? Do you suggest going in and seeing a doctor?
Yes, but I mean, here's what happens. You go into the doctor and you say, I always get better when they give me an antibiotic.
I'm not going to say that.
I know you won't.
Okay.
But many people do, and they pressure the doctor or the PA or the nurse practitioner, and they go, I need an antibiotic, I need an antibiotic. And what do you think you get? You get the daggone antibiotic.
Okay.
And what are you doing to yourself? You're screwing with your microbiome.
Okay.
Don't do that.
Don't do it, but...
Don't push for an antibiotic. In fact, what you can say to the doctor, and it relieves them greatly, to say, and by the way, I'm not asking for an antibiotic. I just need to have some direction. And could I have some asthma? Or is there an allergy or something going on in my lungs? Or do I need to worry about pneumonia? When you have something that lasts this long, or starts getting worse later, you sound worse than you did last week.
I do.
So, I want to listen to your lungs, and
Okay.
we'll make a decision.
All right, so anyone that goes over 2 weeks...
I got a stethoscope out in my car.
All right, I'm ready for you. You're ready.
It's in the refrigerator, the
we
cold thing.
We won't discuss poor Joan's health, but we'll get it taken care of. But for
Before we
those
go-
of you who don't have a doctor in the room, if it's after 2 weeks, it might be good to go in. Just don't ask for an antibiotic. Find out what the cause is.
Make sure it's clear to your provider that you're not pushing for an antibiotic. That'll be a helpful thing for you.
Okay.
It's a very important point. Now, we are streaming live right now. Last week, Joni and I watched Prairie Home Companion on streaming live while it was going on. Of course, the words didn't sync with the
It was close.
It was close, and it was just wonderful. I
Really
loved
enjoyed
it, and so you can watch this show. It's a picture show as well as a.
I watched it as well, but I must say I was disappointed that Garrison wasn't on. They had a guest host.
He was great. I think
The guest host is going to be taking over now.
Well, maybe
Maybe.
Joni and I think he might be better. Garrison's, it's time.
40 years?
40 years.
Give him a break.
Quite a show.
Let him come back as a guest periodically.
Okay,
The
so
new
you
guy
told them
was
they can watch our streaming show, and the best way to do is to go to prairiedoc.org If you go to prairiedoc.org, and then you can pull up radio on there. Right now, who's your tech person? I'm trying to think.
Kelsey.
Kelsey is working on this right now to make it easier, because I sat with Kelsey this morning and I said, Kelsey, the majority of people listening to this program are closer to my age, and I don't move as fast as you do on a computer, and I'm not just going to make some tweaks so that it's easier when you go to Prairie Doc. She just goes boop, 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 here it is. I said, yeah,
Yeah,
that
what
didn't
you
work
can
for
do
me.
is go to YouTube, go to Prairie Doc, and then somewhere within Prairie Doc on YouTube you can find the radio show streaming.
But Kelsey is going to improve on that this week. I know she is, and it's going to be much easier to locate it. So if you want to watch it, it is there. It's just trying to find it, you know. They can see it. So if they want to see us live, we're live.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Enough on my health, enough on Prairie Doc. How about heart? You said
But-
you wanted to talk about heart.
I do, but Bob, you had a question or a thought on your mind.
Bob, with a thought on his
I
mind.
forgot what it was.
Okay, deep thinker.
So do you have a heart question? You have a heart question?
No, I did have something, and then I forgot what it was because I got engrossed. It'll come to me when you guys are
Oh, the
5 minutes later.
streaming issues. You were thinking about streaming.
Oh yeah. You know, on YouTube too, and you can just put it in your favorites bar when you finally get it to where you want to go.
Oh,
And
okay.
click on favorites, and it'll take you right there. And then each week is indexed on the right-hand side, and you can watch previous ones that are archived. You can watch your most current ones. That's what I do at home.
Okay.
Oh, very nice.
I'm not very computer literate, so.
Me neither.
I do
But-
the best I can with it, but
Well, you know, I
Kelsey
think
is something else.
the thing that kids do is they feel free to explore, so they explore more. We older people don't explore as much. You go, I don't know where it is, and scream
And you're done.
at the machine,
Yeah.
and then you're done. Explore, go around, and then of course you don't want to. And I'm going to watch that video. No, keep exploring to find what you need. Don't get distracted, because
Okay.
we all get distracted.
The kick is if it asks you, are you sure? The answer is always no.
Yeah. It is-
You'll erase something, I know.
Okay, another issue to say is that we're working on a television show we're going to do in 1st of March, or early March, on elder abuse. And part of it is going to be on scamming. I mean, and all of us are at risk for that. I mean, I don't care how clever you may be, but and you know what? People are scammed all the time, and I've been scammed twice, fairly big, you know, not big time, but, you know, construction type things. You trust people, you get to know them, and then could you just pay advance so we can get these bricks, you know, so you pay advance, and then off they go.
They're gone.
And with your money in the banks. And, you know, that whole thing. There are a lot of things we all should be careful about, and there's some things and lessons that we can all learn. And so we're going to do a show on scamming, but also elder abuse. You know, there was a TV show that we just kind of scrambled through last night at about 9 o'clock or something, where they were watching somebody, they were purposefully having an actor abuse an actor pretending to be an elderly Alzheimer's patient, and then they videoed the people reacting.
They were in a public spot, so they're sitting maybe in a barber shop or something.
Yeah.
And this
You saw it.
caregiver, no, but the caregiver then started abusing the person he's caring, and they wanted to see if people around would come to the aid. So
And it
that
was
interesting.
amazing to see that people did. You know, all sorts of people, you know, of styles and shapes and colors and personalities and levels of education and economics. It's amazing.
wouldn't deal with
it
the
doesn't
abuse.
seem
Yeah.
to, you know, you think about it, which of those people are the ones who are the most ethical and which of the ones are not, and they're from all, the ethical and unethical are from all those different levels. It's just
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, abuse does go on, and so that show is going to air in March, and it will talk about elder abuse in all of its different terrible forms.
But let's talk about heart. There's some things that I'd like to say that are just really interesting to me.
Good.
One of them is blood. Blood is part of this whole thing. That's why you're red, right? That's what red is all about, because that's what the heart does. It sends that blood around. And what does blood do? Blood carries oxygen, and it carries nutrients and energy and food but it carries oxygen to every cell of our body that is alive. I mean, there's a lot of cells that are on the top layer of our skin that's dead. That's just kind of waiting for its turn to slough off, and then there's a new one underneath. It's turning over. But the alive cells stay alive because they get oxygen.
And they
and
need
get
the blood
nutrients.
running through
And
to
the
bring
blood has to bring every single cell that particular oxygen and nutrient. And it also needs to pick up waste, mostly in carbon dioxide, which is the breakdown product. Carbon and oxygen combine in a carbon, 2 parts oxygen, 1 part carbon. And it carries it to the lungs, and the lungs exhale the carbon dioxide and brings in oxygen-rich air and exchanges it. And so it's an amazing thing that does happen. And of course, carbon dioxide goes out into the air and is blown somewhere where trees take the carbon dioxide in and give off oxygen. Thank you, chloroform and all of the wonderful parts of this macrobiome that we live in. So, back to the story of oxygen. So how does it carry? What does the blood do to carry it? Well, there is this complex protein called hemoglobin. And if you study hemoglobin, you could spend your whole life studying hemoglobin, but it's sort of like the jaws of, jaws. That in its molecular structure, it's open. When it doesn't have oxygen, oxygen comes in and it closes it around the oxygen and gloms onto it until it gets to the cell. And for reasons somebody knows, but I can't say right now because it's not there, it releases it. I think it's because when the carbon dioxide is available, it opens up for that, and then the oxygen is released. So the exchange that the hemoglobin molecule does on the cell level is fascinating. But if you go to the story of the heart that pumps the blood, it's almost even more fascinating. And I'll say something that I've said several times before, but it just is a beautiful physiology of this. So the heart squeezes. All right, now let's just say that all we have is one chamber, and it's the left ventricle, because that's the main pump, right? We've got the right ventricle, and we've got 2 atria that collect the blood, and the right ventricle squeezes and pushes it through the lungs. But the left ventricle is what squeezes, and it pumps the blood to the whole body. All right, so this most muscled chamber, shaped like a V, has a valve on the top of the V that lets the blood in. And on the left side, a smaller valve called the aortic valve that lets the blood out. So when the ventricle squeezes, the letting the blood valve in closes, and pushes it out, the valve that allows the blood out, the aortic valve, out to the rest of the body. And it goes out through all the vessels, and they're all elastic. They're stretchable. So they stretch, but they're elastic. And so when the ventricle is done squeezing, it relaxes, and immediately the blood wants to go back. So it reverses direction, starts to go back toward where it came from because of the elasticity of all the blood vessels, the arterial side of the blood vessel, right? And the aortic valve slams shut. And when the heart is relaxing, the coronary arteries that feed the heart are at above the aortic valve, and all that blood rushing back rushes through the coronary arteries. So that, isn't it interesting that the coronary arteries fill during the time that the ventricle is relaxing, and it feeds the heart muscle itself when it's relaxing in that lub-dub. After the dub, the time before the next lub, is when the coronary arteries fill during the relaxation phase. They are fed from above the aortic valve, and they're the only vessels in the body that fill during that relaxation diastole, whereas all of the rest of them, the ventricle goes, oh, I got a good blood supply, I'm invigorated, squeezes, blood shoots out the aortic valve and fills all of the rest of the cells and carries that oxygen capacity and brings the hemoglobin home. But during diastole, the heart, Who designed that?
Just fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
So I just, that whole structure of the heart muscle and how it works is just glorious. So when we have a heart attack, it's a blockage of the coronary arteries that are filled during diastole. And as we get older, diastole changes, and this squeeze time, that time between the lub and the dub, lub, dub, pause, lub, dub, lub, dub, lub, dub. That's when it works.
Dr. Holm, is that the measurement then of blood pressure, the systolic and diastolic
Yeah.
numbers that?
Right. So if let's say I'm measuring the pressure, I have a pressure sensor in an artery in my arm, within the arm, one of the major arteries, a big artery in my arm. Okay, and I have a measurement in there. And so when systole occurs, when the ventricle squeezes, boom, the pressure within the vessels goes up to maybe 120 millimeters of water. Actually, it's water, and then, but when it relaxes, okay, it doesn't completely go away. There's no loss of pressure. Then the pressure goes back, and you have the pressure within the vessels pushing the blood through the coronary arteries. That it doesn't go any lower than 80. So if the pressure is 120 over 80, then that's the normal, right? It doesn't drop below 80. So it goes to as high as 120, drops as low as
80.
to as 80. So that's that pressure is what fills the coronary arteries. If it goes all the way down and you didn't have any, then it isn't filling the coronary arteries.
Is this why when people have heart problems that they go on blood thinners? Because you want the blood to be thinner? Is that correct or is that incorrect?
You do, let's put it this way. See, that's too broad of a question. Now, point
okay,
that
I'm
down.
sorry.
Now, what are you thinking? What
I'm
question
wondering why are people on blood thinners?
Okay. Blood thinners are mostly prescribed for people who have what is called atrial fib, or atrial fibrillation or fibrillation. Atrial fib is when the atria, what happens is in systole, the ventricle squeeze, right? And then in diastole, the blood also flows back from all of the vessels in the venous system all the way in, and it's pouring in to the atria, both the pulmonary, or the right side and the left side. It's coming in, and that's when the ventricles are open and the valves from the atria into the ventricle are open, and they pour passively in through the atria into the ventricle, and then the last minute of
Millisecond, whatever.
milliseconds, the atria squeeze and empty themselves. In a normal heart, there's this diastole, lub dub, pause, and then just before the lub, the atria squeeze and empty the last bit of the blood in the atria. They're almost really just a vessel, almost. They're just almost a dilated vessel. We're running out of time. But they squeeze. Well, in atrial fib, they don't squeeze. And so the blood slugs into, gets kind of sluggish in there, and clots can form.
And that's
then,
where you want the
then
thinner.
it goes into the ventricles,
Okay.
and then clots can flip to the lung, or can flip to the brain, or out to all
Which you
the vessels.
don't want.
So
Right.
you anticoagulate them with warfarin.
Okay. Good work. Boy, they got a long discussion on heart.
That's
We're
too
going to
long.
take a final break. We'll be right back.
That was really good.
We're not going to get into the break-in. Prairie Doc Radio. I'm hoping you're interested in this. I'm fascinated by this discussion on heart, and I'm sure our listeners are as well. We've talked about atrial fib, and it just seems as though as I get older, I hear of more and more men than women that are on blood thinners. Do they all have atrial fib, and they didn't have it when they were younger? What's the deal?
Well, there are a lot of people in atrial fib that didn't get anticoagulated for years. A lot of strokes have been as a result of atrial fib.
Okay.
I will take people off of blood thinners when they're in atrial fib when they're a big fall risk, though. So there's a point.
At what risk? I missed.
Falling. If they're falling,
you don't
and
want
they're
them
slamming
falling.
their head into the floor. There's a time when you don't do harm. The harm is greater than the advantage of any medicine. So that's one thing. People who have heart valve replacement will commonly, specifically the mechanical heart valves, they all need to be anticoagulated because clots can form on those valves. There are other people who need to be anticoagulated. Pulmonary emboli patients. People will have clots in their legs. It'll flip to their lung. And when that happens, it's life-threatening, and so they get on blood thinners for 6 months. You stop them, and if they have another episode, then they're on it forever. People who have acquired blood clotting problems will be on it forever. Now, you'll find those oftentimes during childbirth. Women will be fine, and then they'll start having blood clots to their lungs, and you go, whoops. You got to be on blood thinners. You do a study to see that they have a blood clotting disorder, and they do, and so they're put on warfarin. And generally, you can go searching through the world and find that some people have low levels of this blood clotting disorder. But if they never get into trouble, you don't worry about it. But if they start blood clots to their lungs, and you discover this clotting disorder. You put them on blood thinners. Well, I don't even worry about the clotting disorder. I look at them clinically. If they're starting flipping clots to the lung, I have a low threshold to put them back on it. But I give them that 6 months, stop it, wait for any sign of symptoms, boom, they're on it again. Some people have strokes. Now, the thing about it is warfarin and those kinds of medicines don't work for strokes as well as aspirin.
Okay.
Or aspirin. Or Plavix, which is basically aspirin, or dipyridamol, which is dipyridamol and aspirin.
So a lot of these things have really basically saved lives,
and
haven't they?
we can go on and on, but we're out of time, aren't
But
we?
we're saving lives, and that's
Yeah,
good, and that's
that's
good reason
interesting.
for it. Very
Well, I
interesting.
didn't answer your question. We're going to have to talk about this next week.
I think so, but we hope all of you've enjoyed our Prairie Doc Radio program, and will listen again for Prairie Doc, brought to you by the Avera Medical Group Brookings. Dr. Holmes on call with the Prairie Doc television program tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. We'll discuss multiple sclerosis.
With Jerry Freeman, Dr. Jerry Freeman.
He's a great guy,
Yes.
neurologist from Sioux Falls. I think that's it, Dr. Holmes. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Bob, and stay healthy out there, people.